Welcome to the Ghostly Gallery podcast, a place where we explore the world of horror in film, TV, literature, and popular culture. Well, greetings, everyone. Welcome to the show. My name is Bruce Markison. As always, I'm joined by my co-host and extraordinaire producer, Tracy Asteria. Tracy, how are you doing tonight?
I am doing excellent, Bruce. How are you doing this evening?
Doing well, though I did want to mention a sad note that just came over last night, the day before we doing this recording, and that is the passing of the legendary director and producer, did many horror films, the great Roger Corman, 98 years of age, prolific career. Made a number of outstanding horror films, particularly in the 1950s and 60s. Bucket of Blood, House of Usher, Mask of the Red Death, The Raven. He was especially good at doing those Edgar Allan Poe adaptations that in many cases starred Vincent Price. And he was really a master of taking extremely low budgets, seemingly with no money, and then making something really good because he was creative, he was visionary, he had good actors that he was able to direct, he had a great rapport with them, phenomenal career, and something I thought we should mention before we do get to our guest this week, the great Roger Corman. If you're in the world of horror, you've been influenced by Corman at one point or another, whether you realize it or not, because he was involved in hundreds of horror films over the years.
Oh my goodness, absolutely. And just responsible for starting so many careers and, with actors and other directors and writers. So it's a loss. I didn't realize he was 98, but what an extraordinary guy.
Yeah, absolutely. And some of the young actors that he worked with, Jack Nicholson, Robert De Niro, he's kind of a mentor to these people. Not just people in horror, but in many other genres as well. And he was somebody that had so many connections in the world of horror and just an incredible contributor to this genre from the late 50s, really all the way up through the current day. So very sad to hear about the passing of Roger Corman. Even though he certainly lived a long life, 98, always tough to lose a legendary figure like that. Well, in this week's episode, we are going to be talking to an award-winning and prolific author. His name is Tom Deady. Tom, in 2016, won the prestigious Bram Stoker Award for superior achievement in a first novel. The book, called Haven, drew plenty of critical praise, continues to draw praise since it came out 8 years ago. Since then, Tom Deady has written several books, including Eternal Darkness, The Clearing, Of Men and Monsters, and Edgewater Chronicles. So we welcome to the Ghostly Gallery the author Tom Deady. Tom, welcome. How you doing?
I'm doing well, Bruce. Thanks for having me. Hi, Tracy. It's really a pleasure to be here. I love talking horror, the genre, books, movies, anything. So thrilled to be here.
Oh, we're excited to have you.
Thank you.
You're in the right place to talk about all that. We love it as well. I wanted to begin, Tom, by talking about where you were born and raised. I understand you grew up in a town located not far from Salem, Massachusetts. Tell us about that.
That's correct. I grew up in Malden, Massachusetts, which it's funny because when I was growing up there, I thought I lived in like a small town. And as I got older, I realized Malden's a pretty big city. It's, I don't know what the population is or was, but we lived in such an isolated little neighborhood that, we had our corner store. We walked to the Malden Square was the center of town, which had the bowling alleys and the movie theaters. And it, when I watch movies on TV and it's, they're depicting small towns, I pictured Malden to be that small town because I only knew my little bubble of it. But it's really a big city in Massachusetts. And as I grew older, I began to realize just how big a city it was.
Being close to Salem, Tom, were you able to visit there a lot as a child? And if so, did that influence you in wanting to become a horror author?
Yeah, Salem was such an attraction locally back then, probably more so, um, more than it is today. Today, it's like insanely touristy, but it was more of a historical attraction when I was growing up back in the 70s. So we would go on school field trips there and go to like the House of Seven Gables and the Witches Museum and learn some of the history and some of the literary history that took place there with the book The House of Seven Gables, and The Crucible and things like that. So yeah, we spent a lot of time there. Now, like I said, nowadays I go there every October to vend at the street market they have there, and it's like Mardi Gras in October. It's absolutely insane there right now. It's not like when I was a kid. It's not just a little history town anymore. It's a tourist attraction.
Oh my gosh, that sounds so cool.
It's a spectacle.
Oh my goodness. So did you have any writers in particular or anybody that influenced you to become an author?
You know, it's going to sound cliche, but it was Stephen King. So I grew up reading things like the Hardy Boys and Alfred Hitchcock and the Three Investigators, which were kind of like my generation's version of YA, I guess.
Mhm.
And I always felt drawn towards the ones that felt like they had a supernatural twist to them, even though kind of like Scooby-Doo, they never turned out to be really, really supernatural. And then as I got older, I started reading other authors and more. There were no restrictions on what we read back then. There were no real YA categories or teen categories. So I vividly remember it. It was, 45 years ago, and I remember it like it just happened, that I went to my local Woolworths. I don't know if you guys even remember Woolworths. It used to be kind of
Sure.
like a department
Yeah.
store. And they had those little black spinny racks with all the mass market paperbacks on them. And I'm looking for something to read. And I find this, all black cover with a single drop of blood, which was, of course, the Salem's Lot cover. And I went home, and that was it. That's what I wanted to do after I read that book.
Oh my gosh. Oh wow. Have you ever had a chance to meet Stephen King or correspond with him?
I have met him once. He did a signing up in Maine for, I think it was for Finders Keepers.
Mhm.
And I was fortunate enough to get tickets, and I do have a picture shaking his hand, and I got to talk to him for all of 15 seconds as I was ushered by, but it was still, dream come true for me.
Oh my gosh, that would have been phenomenal.
Yeah, it was pretty amazing. I've
Jeez.
seen him several times giving presentations and interviews and things, but that was my brush with success, I guess, with Bane.
Tom, you mentioned those three investigator books, and I love them. I didn't read them as a child. I tended to gravitate more toward the Alfred Hitchcock anthologies. But in the last just 2 or 3 years, I've actually been ordering those books from Amazon and reading them, even though they're billed as young adult. I find them appropriate for a simple-minded adult like myself. I really enjoy them. They go very quickly. The writing style is easy, but it's not at such a low level that it's not fun for me as an adult. I absolutely love those books. I have to ask you, do you have a favorite in that series?
It's been so long since I've read them. I couldn't tell you a favorite, but I will tell you that over on another shelf, I have my entire collection from when I was a kid. So,
Oh, wow.
and I did go back and read a couple recently, and yeah, they read a little dated and, a little politically incorrect at times, but the mysteries are pretty solid though. They good. I still want to live in a junkyard with a little converted RV as a lab and headquarters. So.
Yeah, the author was great. Robert Arthur was a terrific writer, even though he's not that famous compared to some other writers of that era. He was apparently good friends with Alfred Hitchcock. He contributed to many of his anthologies. I believe did some editing for those. So those three investigators, they're always going to be a hit with me. Let's talk about your writing career. And for you as a horror writer, it really started with Haven. Tell us about sitting down to write Haven, your first book, and tell us what the book exactly is about and where this idea came from.
Okay. So I don't know how much time we have, but
Take all the time you want.
The story of me sitting down and writing it is a long one because I actually started it in about 1990.
Wow.
As I so writing is something I've always wanted to do, and I never had the guts to try it, I guess. So, but I was always reading Writer's Digest and Writer's Market and so I took a mail order class through Writer's Digest, and I still have some of the typewritten pages of the original beginnings of Haven from 1990. The idea, the story concept is, I don't know. I think it's not very original in hindsight. It's very much my love letter to the books I grew up reading in the late 70s and 80s, such as It, Summer of Night, Boy's Life, the very nostalgic coming of age kind of vibe to it. So you'll see a lot of influences from those books. It is probably my favorite horror novel, and the idea of like recurring horror that happened every 27 years fascinated me after I read that. So I was trying to come up with a concept, something like that. And the original idea for Haven was based on the full moon recurs on the same day roughly every 17 years. And I was trying to come up with something that happened every time the full moon fell on a certain day of the year. That never really came to fruition, but the 17-year hiatus kind of stayed there, and I kept working with it. I just had to find ways to fit into the story why that 17 years, as it turned out, was more of a coincidence. If you've read the book, it's not anything planned or supernatural that drove that schedule. Kind of it's more happenstance in the book, but that's where the original idea came from. And the original scene that I started writing with, I don't know, have you guys read the book before I get into too much detail about a specific scene?
I have not. I have not.
Okay.
But tell us as much as you want to about it.
Oh, sure. It's not really a spoiler. There's a scene where there's a young boy fishing with his dad at the lake, and he casts out his rod. And the original vision I had was a kid fishing, and he hooks something, and something comes out, and the something that comes out is, of course, the monster. And that was the initial scene I had in my head when I wrote that book. And it is still in the book. But getting back to the writing of it, like I said, I started in 1990, and I would write in fits and starts for the next 15 years, or about 12 years, basically. I was raising two daughters, working multiple jobs, and doing all the things adults are supposed to do. So I would write fervently for a while, and then I'd like put it away for years, and then pull it out when I got the itch again. So I call it my third child. I tell my two daughters that it's their sibling because it kind of grew up with them. So yeah, this is my writing advice. Don't do what I did. When I wrote the book, like I said, I would get an idea for a scene, and I would have to write that scene. I didn't know where it was going to happen or when it was going to happen in the timeline of the story, but it was like I had to get it out of me. So at the end, this is fast forward to 2012 when the book was finally finished. I guess it wasn't 1990. It was probably like 1995 that I started. But up 2012 is when I finished it. And I literally had this 144,000 word monster that had no timeline, no correlation of events. And so I had to take each scene, summarize it on an index card with like the date and time it took place. And I had 100 index cards spread out on my dining room table. And I'm like, this happened here. And I had to move them all around and make them fit. And it was an absolute nightmare. And I'm sorry to say, I still write that way today. I did not learn my lesson.
But it works for you, though. It must work for
I don't
you.
know why, but it does. Yeah. There's things pop into my head and I have to write them, and then I figure out where it belongs in the story I'm writing. But, it was really kind of the perfect storm when Haven was finished. Bruce, I mentioned that my friend and I back in 2004 started a Boston Red Sox blog. This is back when blogs were cool. And it actually became pretty popular. It was called Surviving Grady because Grady Williams had been the coach of the Red Sox who had made an infamous blunder in the 2003 American League Championship Series that cost them the series and got him fired. So we started blogging in 2004. We called it Surviving Grady, and we kind of did a sort of comical diary of each game the next day. At the end, when they won the World Series, we said, hey, we might have a book here. So we put all the journals together, and we actually that was my first book, was Surviving Grady. Unfortunately, some guy named King and Stuart Onan decided to put out a book called Faithful, which was basically the same idea and format as Surviving Grady, and got a little bit more recognition. But our blog had been fairly popular, and Stuart Onan's folks reached out to me and said, hey, can you interview him on your blog to promote Faithful? And I said, sure. And I had read Stuart's work. He used to write horror. He's kind of slipped more toward mainstream now, but he wrote some very, very cool horror novels back in the day. So I interviewed him, and I stayed in touch with him after that. And then finally at like 2012, like I said, I screwed up the courage to say, hey, I actually wrote a book. What do you think about taking a look at it? So I printed out the manuscript, sent it to him, and not only did he take a look at it, he edited the whole thing for me and gave me an absolutely perfect blurb. And Perfect Storm, Cemetery Dance, who's never open for general submissions, was open for submissions. I sent it in after I fixed everything Stuart told me to fix. Brian Freeman reached out to me, said Richard Chismar wants to read it. I sent them the whole manuscript, and finally, after 4 years, 2016, it came out as the limited edition hardcover and ebook.
Oh, wow.
Very nice. Very nice. So you're a big baseball fan, just like me.
Funny story. I kind of lost my interest for baseball. I was a huge fan. Like I said, we did the website. We kept up with the website until probably 2013. But I don't know. I just started realizing how much time I was spending. I was watching every Red Sox game. So I was like 3 hours a night watching baseball. And I started thinking like, this is taking a lot of my time. And as I stopped watching the games, I kind of just lost interest in the sport as well. I don't know. Organized sports for me in general has taken kind of a backseat, but I was a huge fan for about 15 years. I lived the Red Sox.
I went to Fenway Park last year with my wife and daughter. First time I'd ever been there. Absolutely loved it. Fell in love with the whole atmosphere. The aura there was like going into a time machine. We sat behind home plate under the basically that roof there. It was a very hot day, so it was kind of nice to be in the shade. When I first walked in, all I could see was the green field and the red walls and seats of the stadium. And Just really fell in love. I regret not having gone there sooner. I have found, though, Tom, that there is room for both baseball and horror. So I'm hoping that I can lure you back into our national pastime. Occasionally they do connect, not that often, but occasionally. But that's very interesting about writing about the Red Sox. I'd love to see that book. Let's get back to Haven, though, for a moment. I know that, I haven't read the book. I did read a little bit about it. It's set in a small town. There's a series of killings that take place. They end up arresting a guy that they think is the killer. And as soon as he goes into prison, the killings stop. But then some doubts start to spring up about whether he's actually the killer. So as I kind of recall from reading that, that's really the gist of it, right?
It is. So that action took place back in 19. I'm sorry, I'm getting my years screwed up now. It's been it's been a while since I've talked about Haven. That took place 17 years earlier than the book. That was 1961 when those murders took place, and
right.
Paul Graymore was convicted of them. 17 years later, he's released from prison, decides to return home to fix up his house, to sell it. And while he's there, of course, the murders start up again. Total coincidence, as it turns out. I'm not spoiling anything. I think everybody knows there's a monster involved. So,
yeah.
But yeah, Paul Graymore is... I had a lot of fun with his character. He was disfigured as a child, so he was an easy target to be the monster in the little town he lived because of his appearance. And he in fact did confront the monster in 1961 and actually tried to rescue a girl. And that's how they found him, with the body of the girl in his arms that he failed to rescue. And that's why he was convicted. But most of the action takes place in 1978 when he's back in town and he meets up with two 12-year-old boys who live on the street he lived on, right, that borders the lake. And that's kind of the little, a little band of brothers that get together to fight the monster.
So it's your first book. It meets with tremendous critical praise. You win the Stoker Award. Were you surprised at how people were so receptive to it?
I was, and still am, stunned. Yeah, as a writer, you go through a lot of imposter syndrome, and you worry, am I any good? And so when Brian Freeman reached out to me and said, "Hey, you're on the list for the Stokers," and I was like, "Wow!" Because I had gone to the Stoker Con convention and went to the awards dinner in 2016, which was obviously for 2015 books. That was in Vegas, and that was like my first big event for writing that I went to, and I was like a fish out of water. I didn't know anybody there. There were all these, John Mayberry was there and Robert McCammon, and I'm just totally starstruck. And I go to this awards dinner. I don't know anybody, sitting by myself. And Mercedes Yardley, who was another fantastic horror writer, won the Stoker Award. She was at one table over from me. And I didn't really know her at the time. I knew of her name, but she went up and accepted the award, and she came back to the table. And she's looking at this award, just tears streaming down her face. And I'm like, wow, this is really a big deal. Like, I didn't even know at the time how big a deal it was. And then when Brian reached out to me and said, "You're on the ballot," I was just blown away. And when I made the final ballot, I'm like, and I was planning on going to the event anyway, because I was trying to become more involved in the community. And that year it happened to be on the Queen Mary out in Long Beach, which is the best venue for an event like that, because the ship is haunted and it's just the coolest place I've ever been. So and so I got to the event and I was talking to one of the HWA board members, Brian Matthews, who I had met years before at Borderlands, which was a writing kind of boot camp, they called it. Brian's like, "Do you have your speech ready just in case?" And I'm like, "No, like, what are you talking about?" He's like, "No, you need to write a speech. Like, you don't want to get up there. And so I'm like, okay, I'll write a speech. And I'll never forget sitting at the table, just an absolute, like my whole body thrumming with nerves. And I had my wife and my two daughters were there.
Yeah.
And when they announced my name and I got up in a total daze, and my daughter just latched onto me and she was so proud she wouldn't let go. And I was like, I gotta get it. It took me like 5 minutes to get up there. I didn't think they didn't think I was coming. Yeah, what a surreal moment. I still look back at it and it's just I can't believe it's real.
One last question I wanted to ask about this book, Haven. When I see the title, I immediately think of the sci-fi show Haven, which may have come out a little bit before your book came out. It has nothing to do with your show. They're two totally separate things, but I'm wondering, has anyone ever gotten them confused?
All the time. And
Really?
I hate it because it was based on a Stephen King thing. And it's so the original title that when I sent it to Stuart Onan to edit was called Homecomings. And the reason is because Paul Graymore comes home. There's another character, one of the little boys, the 12-year-old boys that he teams up with to fight the monster. His grandfather had been involved with the creation of the monster back in World War II and had been living on the streets of Boston as just a homeless alcoholic since those events. He comes back to Haven as well to, when he realizes what's going on. So I was like, all these people are coming home. I'm going to call it Homecoming. So I get the manuscript back from Stuart, and the first thing he has in red ink is, "This title sucks. You have to change this." So the name of the town was Haven. Again, that goes back to my Salem days, where my fictional town of Haven was called that because it was formed by a group of people who fled Salem before they became accused of witches. So they called their town Haven as a haven, of safety for them. But yeah, it being tied to that television show, I don't know. In hindsight, it's not a great look, I don't think, but
may have spurred some more interest for your book,
yeah, I guess I
possibly.
shouldn't,
Yeah.
I shouldn't complain, but it was really not inspired by it. Had nothing to do with it. It was just the fictional town I came up with. And again, I did start writing the book in like 1995. So
yeah. So this first book takes 17 years, although off and on writing, you're not writing continuously during that time. And it seems like since then, you've been trying to make up for lost time because you have been able to crank out a number of good books, including Eternal Darkness, The Clearing, Of Men and Monsters. You've sped up your process here. You've refined that a little bit. So it's kind of amazing what you've learned from that first experience.
yeah, I obviously I learned a lot, but not enough. Like I said, I still make a lot of the same mistakes. But it again, it was when I did finish that and I got the interest from Cemetery Dance back in 2012. I said I'm going to give this a go. I went back, took online classes to get my master's degree in English and creative writing. At the same time, I just continued writing. Like I said, pretty much every day I try to write. And another thing that really helped me, and this is kind of a cliche too for writers, I think, but there's an event in November called NaNoWriMo, which is short for National Novel Writing Month. And the event is, or the challenge is, to try to write 50,000 words during the month of November. And they have a portal on their website, and you go on and you put your word count in every day. And for whatever reason, that really motivates me to just sit down and write a lot during that month. And I'm very fortunate to have a supportive wife who is like, "Go write, get out of here, go write. You're supposed to be writing." So several times managed to knock out the 50,000 words in a month, which is, they call it novel length. For me, it's like half a novel, but Yeah, so I've been very productive doing that. It's faded off a little bit now that my process is more steady. I don't feel the need to, to try and puke out 50,000 words in 4 weeks. It's absolutely brutal to try to do it when you're working, a full-time job and all that. But it 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 was something that helped me learn how to write every day and be productive at it. So it's a great tool for writers, I think, that are aspiring writers, because the write every day, the first piece of advice you're going to hear as a writer is you need to write every day. And to me, that's probably the worst advice, because it's almost impossible when you're starting out to stick to that. It's like being a runner and saying, okay, you need to run every day. You're going to be tired. Not going to want to do it, be busy. And then the minute you miss that one day, you feel like a failure. Well, I'm not writing every day, so I'm not a writer. So anytime I'm on a panel and I talk about writing advice, I kind of tell people to ignore that and try to write on their own schedule, and yet try to write every day. But if you don't, you're not failing. So,
Right.
but yeah, that NaNoWriMo process and just the motivation of having success with Haven is kind of what got me in a good track to continue and be able to put out the books I put out. It's funny, I hear people talking about, I want to write, but I don't have an idea. And I'm like, oh my God, I have nothing but ideas and not enough time to write them all down.
Right. Well, your productivity continues because you have a new book out. It is called Those Left Behind. Tell us about it.
Sure. I guess I'm kind of branding this as a supernatural thriller. It's very low on the horror scale, in my opinion. There's not any gore or not even a lot of violence. It's about two friends who go out to camp in their backyard when they're 11 years old, and while they're out there camping, somebody breaks into the house and murders the boy's family. And his friend who was camping with him, unfortunately, takes that time to go in and use the bathroom, and he is mistakenly murdered as the other sibling. So that's the prologue. And then he ends up seeing the killer, and he's traumatized by the event, and he spends the next 10 years in a mental health facility with PTSD and dissociative trauma and all. I did a lot of research on some mental health issues that could really lead to the behavior he suffers from. Again, similar to Haven, when he does get out at age 21, he returns home, and that's when things start to happen. And it's kind of an unreliable narrator where you're not sure when you're reading it, is his mental health failing him, or is there a ghost that's trying to help him figure out who killed his family?
Oh,
Is he
wow.
looking for revenge?
The main character?
Yeah. Is he looking to find the killer of his family? And
No,
no.
he goes home just to try to get, assimilated back into a normal life. And, it's the only place he knows. He has no family. So he goes home. They had actually convicted somebody of the murder, again, similar to Haven, now that I think about it.
Yeah.
Who was a scapegoat. So no, he's just looking to resume or begin a normal life, and weird things start to happen the minute he gets back into the house.
Right. And the murders have a supernatural connection.
The murders don't. The way
Oh,
he
they don't.
solves them, the way he solved them does. The ghost of his friend that was murdered comes back and is giving him clues to help him solve the murder.
I see. Yeah.
So it's very subtle supernatural. It's almost like a murder mystery more than horror supernatural.
Now the book is set in 2009. Any significance to the time frame?
For that one, no. I wanted to get it before COVID because I didn't know how to deal with that in a book. So not really, nothing really significant about the time. I just picked a time frame that worked for me.
Yeah. Now, the book came out in March. Are you still making appearances for it?
Yeah, I just another little anecdote I'll share is when we uprooted from Massachusetts to Arizona, we also bought an RV. So we spend a lot of time traveling in the RV, and I go to many conventions and Comic Cons and those types of events. So we just got back from a cross country trip. I went to San Antonio for the Ghoulish Book Fest, Tennessee for the Mid-South Con, and then Williamsburg, Virginia for the big Author Con event that Joe Ripple and Brian Keene put on every year. It's a great charity event if you haven't heard of it. And we just got back from that. I did Tucson Festival of Books here in town. And then we'll be heading out at the end of this month to go to Stoker Con and another event whose name escapes me up in Northern California.
Yeah, you're doing a lot of promotion. That's
terrific. And then more to come. Of course, October is the big horror time. So I head back to New England every October. I'll be doing, like I said, the Salem Open Market. I will do another event called the Merrimack Valley Halloween Festival of Books that Christopher Golden puts on at the Haverhill Library every year. There's another event called Spooktastic, kind of a spin on the Scholastic Book Fair. It's the Spooktastic Book Fair, which is just started last year, and it's a really cool event. So I've got a pretty full plate schedule for the rest of this year.
Tom, for those who want to get the book, again, it is called Those Left Behind. Can they go to your website? Is that the best place, or should they go to Amazon?
It depends. If they want an ebook, they can go to Amazon. If they want a signed copy, they can go to tomdeady.com and I will sign and send them a copy. Either way works for me.
And it's spelled TOMDEADY.com. So tomdeady.com. Go there to get your signed copy of the new book, Those Left Behind. Well, we continue with our guest this week on the Ghostly Gallery, Tom Deady, who has written a number of books since his first one came out in 2016. Tom, in addition to your writing, you're a big fan of horror TV and films, as I guess a lot of horror writers and authors are. One of your big influences was a TV show that lasted for just one season, but very memorable. They still aired on MeTV, Kolchak the Night Stalker. What is it about this show that first grabbed you?
I think it's probably the age I saw it. I can't remember. I think was it 74 that came out? So yes. I was about 11 years old, and I don't know. It grabbed me the same way the Three Investigators grabbed me. I wanted to strap a tape recorder and camera over my shoulder and go out looking for all the cool stuff that Karl Kolchak found. That Monster of the Week format was just, I don't know. I just loved it. And I know you go back and watch it now and the special effects are god awful and it's super campy, but I don't know. It's very special to me. And I don't think we would have the X-Files if not for that. So it only lasted a year, but I think it had a very long lasting influence.
Well, it's really a tribute to the talent of Darren McGavin, who was so good in the two movies and then the TV show. And ultimately, he decided to end it because it was just becoming too much of a burden. He was not only the lead, but he was one of the producers, and it just was too much of a workload. But he is so good in that role, both in the movies and in TV, it carries it. So you're willing to put up with subpar special effects.
Absolutely. Yeah. You're right. He did carry the show and he carried the movies. And I think Richard Matheson wrote the original screenplay for The Night Stalker. And I think for many, many years after that was the number one watched television movie. Yes. And I don't know what ended up passing it at some point, but that was big event TV back then. And, like I said, the show is just something that has stuck with me, and I don't know. It's just one of those things that hit me in the formative years, and just really hold a special place in my heart.
Well, I grew up with it as well, the two movies and the show, and we were all
Yep.
disappointed when it got canceled after 1 year. I didn't realize it at the time. It wasn't because ABC wanted to stop it, but again, it was McGavin felt it was just too much of a burden for him. Another interesting production that you are a big fan of, a film that came out 1 year later, 1975. It's a movie that's not talked about that much to this day, but I love it as well. Race with the Devil.
Race with the Devil, to me, still has the greatest ending of any horror movie I've ever seen. And I won't spoil it for anyone, but that's another one. I remember watching that on TV, as a 12-year-old kid, and just wide-eyed, and I don't know. There's something about it that just really, now look at me driving around in an RV, right? But yeah, I reached out to some folks. I wanted to do a novelization of the movie. But when I reached out to some folks to help out with it, I guess because it came out on ABC, I think Disney owns the rights. So there's no chance that I'll ever get the rights to it to write the novelization, which is unfortunate. If another funny story tied to that is, at one of the Comic-Cons I went to, Loretta Swit was a guest. And so I go over to her table, and of course everyone's buying the Hot Lips pictures for her to sign. And I'm like, no, I want this one. I have the Race with the Devil picture.
Yeah.
Signed by Loretta Swit. Yeah, that was, again, if anybody listening has not seen that movie, go out and find it. I don't know where it is, but I'm sure you can find it on Shudder or Prime. Greatest ending to a horror movie you'll ever see.
Yeah. Did you talk to Loretta Swit about the movie?
I didn't. It was very busy, and she's kind of, they like to keep the line moving. So
Right.
yeah, I didn't really get a chance to talk to her about it, unfortunately, but
yeah, it's a great one. The
It
finish is terrific, but it creates a sense of paranoia. There's also a great chase scene on the highway that's really well done. Peter Fonda is trying to drive and steer the RV, while Warren Oates is trying to handle the people behind him. And it seems like the pursuers of these two innocent couples, they're just coming out of every corner. Just when you think they might have eluded everybody, more and more people seem to be in on the conspiracy. And then it all does culminate in that tremendous finish. That finish, and also the finish to Burnt Offerings, film of that era. That was another great one, too. One other movie I wanted to talk about, Tom, from the 70s that you like, and this is an absolute classic, and that is Halloween.
Halloween is probably my favorite overall horror movie. It's another one. I remember going to my local theater in Malden. It was called the Granada Theater. It was an absolutely beautiful theater. I wish I could go back and revisit it in time, because it's not like the cookie cutter theaters that are out there today. It had this huge hallway leading up to the ticket booth that had all the coming attraction posters hanging up. And once you got inside the theater, the seats, the curtains, everything was like red velour. It was absolutely beautiful. And I remember going with my best friend to see this Halloween movie, and then the iconic opening scene with the knife and the pumpkin. They're not opening scene, but the picture opening, and the music, of course. And it's just, wow. I don't know. I go back and watch that one every Halloween, and it's, I just think it's amazing. There's nothing I would change about it.
Yeah. Still holds up. Maybe Carpenter's greatest film, although I guess you could get a debate on that. Now, you're not one of those writers who's just a fan, nostalgically, of when you were growing up. You really seem to be a big fan of horror today, and there are a few productions we wanted to ask you about. One of them is one that we haven't really talked about on this show yet, but it came out on HBO, The Last of Us with Pedro Pascal. They've had one season. They're planning a second season. Tell us your thoughts on The Last of Us.
Yeah, I didn't know what to expect from that. I had heard the hype when it came out, and I knew it was based on a video game, and I'm not a gamer, so I didn't really know anything about it. But I said, all right, I'm going to give it a shot. And wow, what an amazing series. And I forget the actress's name who was in it with Pedro Pascal, but they should they should make a new award for the performance they put into that. Absolutely amazing. I loved it. I can't wait for the next season.
Oh my goodness. I haven't yet seen that series yet. So it's actually next on my list to start watching. So
The premise is brilliant, and the execution is even better. It's not your typical horror movie. It's very it's quite an emotional ride, honestly, when you watch it. It's just beautifully done.
oh my goodness. And do I understand that you're also a Mike Flanagan fan?
Mike
He
Flanagan is my new idol. He's a genius. Everything he touches is it makes me envious that I can't do what he does.
Oh my gosh, I
So good.
know. He's one of my absolute favorites, and we talk about him a lot on the show. Do you have like a favorite like Netflix series that you like?
I think it has to be Midnight Mass for yeah. It part of it because it's very Stephen King like. It almost felt like a Stephen King production, but just the way he weaves horror and religion into the vampire mythology it was just brilliant. I was speechless when I was watching. I just couldn't believe how great that was. I did also like, I think it was called The Midnight Club.
Oh yes, yes,
That
yes.
was really good. And I was very sad to see that it's not going to continue, but Jamie Flanagan, his brother, who did some of the writing for it, wrote a big blog dissertation about here's what was going to happen in the next 2 seasons. So any of the cliffhangers you want to know about, you can find out about, which was nice. But yeah, that was another good. They're all been great. Everything he's done. The recent one, House of Usher, was just the way he made every episode kind of tied to a Poe story, but still managed to tell the House of Usher story over all those other mini stories. He's just brilliant.
Oh my gosh. What did you think of the ending of Midnight Mass? Do you feel that they can continue a story if or do you think it was great just where it ended?
I'm as much as I would love to see more of it, I think they should leave it alone because it's just you can just never seem to recapture that magic when you try to make a sequel or continue a series. So I would be happy if they just left it alone.
Nice. Oh my gosh, there's just so many. And, I've been hearing different things about some of his new projects and that he might actually become a part Exorcist franchise. Sorry. I can't remember. I think it's called The Deceiver. That might be part two because they had The Believer that was just released about a year or two ago. And then they have a plan for two more. And Mike Flanagan is kind of in talks with Blumhouse to take on that role.
No, I hadn't heard that. I haven't
Yeah.
seen The Believer yet. So
Oh,
although I
okay.
haven't heard great things, so I don't know.
I
Yeah,
think, if Mike Flanagan became a part of that project, I think he could just take that to a next level. So I think he could do wonders with it if
I
he
agree.
had that
Yeah.
chance. Oh, he's awesome. So yeah, no, absolutely. I'm looking forward to some of his new projects too. So yeah.
Like you, Tom, I'm a big fan of Midnight Mass. That's been my favorite series that Flanagan has done. I think second on my list would be The Haunting of Hill House. What'd you think of that one?
I loved it.
Oh, you got the shirt.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, the thing about Hill House is, first of all, it has the greatest jump scare in the history of horror movies. In that, I've seen so many horror movies. I feel like I always know when the jump scare is coming, and that one, wow, didn't see that coming, and it scared the crap out of me. But yeah, I thought it was really, really well done. the thing about it is he uses, the Haunting of Hill House, but it really doesn't have anything to do with the source material, Hill House,
Yeah.
too much. So I know he gets a lot of criticism for that. I don't know, like, why he doesn't just name it something else, but yeah, I love that. That was probably my second favorite as well. What was the one he did about Turn of the Screw? I can't. Blind Manor.
Blind
I didn't
Manor.
think was as good, but again,
Yeah, I agree.
Turn of the Screw is one of my favorite horror novels of all time. I mean, it's what is it? 140 years old, and we're still debating it and still studying it in
Yeah.
college level courses to see, is it a ghost story or is it a woman losing her mind? And it's, to have that staying power. I just love that story.
Yeah. We should mention people are listening to the audio of the podcast, so they're not able to see that Tom is actually wearing a Haunting of Hill House t-shirt. Tracy and I can see it, but obviously it can't be seen on the audio. So very, very appropriate. I couldn't tell that you were wearing the shirt, so this wasn't a setup or anything, but glad to hear that you like it.
I had
I
to
want to ask you.
Go ahead.
Yeah, I wanted to ask you about one other very current production. And we just spent our most recent podcast before this one. We spent about half the podcast talking about this new movie with David Dastmalchian, Late Night with the Devil. Tracy gave it 4.5 stars. She's a hard grader, so that's really impressive. I gave it 4 stars. I think it's a classic. What'd you think of it?
I honestly just watched it about a week ago, and I loved it. I thought it captured the feel of the 70s talk shows perfectly. I thought the acting was great all across the board. The little montage at the end I didn't think was necessary. That's why I probably wouldn't give it a 5-star. Kind of the second ending, if you will. But yeah, wow, that was really, really well done. Like I said, the acting was phenomenal. The little girl that played the possessed girl was brilliant. And just the way they tied it all back to some very, very subtle foreshadowing that they did early on. That it was really well done. Loved it.
I think Dastmalchian is going to be a big star. And the great thing about him, not only does he star in a lot of these horror films, and in this one, he's the head guy. He's top billed, and he does a great job. But he also happens to be a huge fan of horror, especially classic horror going back to the 1930s and 40s. And I've heard him do some interviews on YouTube, and he's just so passionate about the subject. Sometimes horror actors really aren't that big into the genre, but he really is, and it just makes him more likable to me.
Yeah, I don't know that I've ever seen him in anything else. And I didn't know anything about him. So now I'm more intrigued to know that he's a big horror fan.
Yeah, he's in The Last Voyage of the Demeter, which came out last year.
Okay.
He has a secondary role in that. He did a couple of episodes in the show Gotham, where, as I recall, he played kind of a creepy character. And he's done a few other horror films. Usually he's a second character or, a background character. This is really the first one where he kind of takes center stage from start to finish. And he's great. And he seems like a humble guy. And he's just so passionate. So it's great to see a film like this, Late Night with the Devil. Have you watched any other recent films? Anything from 2024?
Not a lot. I kind of get in the movie watching mode, in the summer and fall. But I did watch the other show that was based on a video game, Fallout. I don't know if you guys have watched that one yet.
Not yet.
Yeah, it's another one based on a video game. It's a post-apocalyptic thing about people that ended up going down to live in these underground vaults, which are like, giant fallout shelters that are almost set up like neighborhoods underground. And then a couple hundred years later, they have to resurface for various reasons. And, it's good. It's more campy than The Last of Us. And It's a lot gorier, kind of for the sake of gore. It like has more of a video game feel, I think.
Yeah.
I think if Walton Scoggins wasn't in it as the ghoul, I might not have stuck with it, but I love him and his character is great. So I did watch and they did kind of suck me in the last episode, which is another reason I didn't love it as much, because they kind of give you this huge info dump on the last episode, and you're like, oh, now everything makes sense. I feel like they should have been feeding you little bits and pieces along the way to keep you going. But yeah, and I can't think of another very recent movie that I've seen, though, unfortunately.
The Fallout show, where is that available?
Uh
Is it streaming or is it on network?
No, it's streaming. I want to say HBO Max, but I'm not positive of that.
Yeah, in Canada, it's streaming on Amazon Prime.
Is
So
it
it
on?
might
Maybe
be,
it's Prime. I
yeah,
forget. I have
yeah.
like all of them, so I can never
Oh.
keep them straight.
Yeah, and I did hear that they actually greenlit it for a season 2. Are you interested in checking season 2 out when it's ready?
I probably will, because, like I said, they did suck me in on the last episode. So, I knew there was one movie I did see. I don't think it was 2024. It might have been earlier. Night Swim. Have you guys?
Oh, I've heard of that. I haven't seen it though.
Yeah, I don't know. I can't really recommend it. It was it's kind of your typical, like, we're gonna throw in a few jump scares and the plot's not really gonna make sense, but what the hell? I don't know. I didn't love it.
So nay on Night Swim, yay on Late Night with the Devil.
Absolutely. Late Night with the Devil. Yeah, I was that was one of the best movies I've seen in a long time for recent horror movies, not series or streaming series. Yeah, it was really good.
I think you're right. I agree with you. Our guest has been Tom Deady. Tom has the new book out, Those Left Behind. And if you'd like to purchase a signed copy of the book, just go to his website. It is tomdeady.com. That's TomDeady.com. TomDeady.com. For Those Left Behind, you can also find his other books, including Haven, his first book, which is still in print. Tom, thank you very much. This has been wonderful. Really enjoyed it. We appreciate you taking an hour to spend with us. Thanks.
Thank you, guys. I just had a blast.
Our guest, Tom Deady, we thank him. We also thank, of course, Tracy Asteria for being our co-host and producer. We thank all of you for listening as well, joining us in this Museum of the Macabre. And we hope you'll join us again next time, right here in the Ghostly Gallery.